Greetings, my fellow Americans, and welcome to another episode of the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. Tonight, we're going to be working on the subject of undue influence, which is a very critical issue. It's kind of an all-inclusive issue. It's a very simple issue, but at the same time, it deals with a lot of small little contrite points that government uses to exert, well, undue influence, inappropriate control over criminal defendants, and it's how one of the main reasons why they're allowed to get away with so much. But before we go into that, if you're watching this on YouTube, please take the time to like and subscribe. Obviously, share the video. The more people out there that get this information, the more our message gets out there, the more we can build our base, and the more we can try to affect change. Also, just as a reminder, if you do want to go back to the original source of this podcast, you can find it on monspiracy.podbean.com. And of course, there's a host of other sites that Podbean distributes it to, so feel free to go out there and take a look. But I do encourage YouTube because it's quite frankly the simplest and easiest platform to work with. But if you have a preference, by all means, go to your favorite spot, and there's a pretty good chance that the podcast will be available there. If it's not, let me know. I will make sure it gets there, if it's at all possible. Okay, that said, on to tonight's topic. As I mentioned, undue influence is an issue that is at the same time very simple and very, very comprehensive in what it covers and what it affects. We've talked before about the unequal comparisons between private citizenship and government actors. And, it's a problem. It's clearly a problem when citizens do something, it's a crime, but when government does it, it's not. Remember, government is made up of people, of citizens who are in an elite standing above the other citizens, but they're still citizens. So how is it that they're able to get away with criminal misconduct in the actions of and duties of their jobs as government officials when citizens cannot? As an example, as I've mentioned this before, law enforcement can lie. And ladies and gentlemen, my cat is over here trying to get attention right now. She realized I started talking. Say hello, Felicia. Yes, you've said hello. There you are. Okay, now go have some fun with your brother. I've got to work. The problem with living in a small little apartment where you have two cats, they love to get involved. I come talk on the phone, they want to talk on the phone. I come to my podcast, they've got to come over and see what I'm talking about. So bear with me as I deal with my own limitations. But as I mentioned, law enforcement can lie. It's a crime to lie to law enforcement. Law enforcement can sit there and tell you whatever they want to tell you. None of it has to be true. But if you lie, you can actually go to jail for it. Defendants suffer huge financial, social harm when they're prosecuted, criminal defendants. They lose their homes, their livelihoods. They suffer social pariahism. They suffer, as I spoke about in my last podcast, they lose their families. Their family dynamics break down. So there's a lot to lose for a criminal defendant. Even if they end up being proven innocent in the end, they lose so much just by virtue of the accusation and the methods they have to go through, the financial struggles they have to go through to prove their innocence, the idea that they have to somehow overcome the court of public opinion afterwards, because in the United States the mass media can publish the name of accused people even before they're convicted. But at the end of the day, the prosecutors suffer none of this. The prosecutor doesn't have a penalty on their wages or income if they lose a case. They certainly they can go home to bed every night. They suffer nothing. They might not get a promotion if they lose enough cases. But at the end of the day, that's nothing compared to the loss and the harm that's caused by the overcriminalization of the United States justice system. Most insidious of all of these abuses, however, is the concept of undue influence. And it's insidious because it encapsulates everything. Keep in mind, undue influence in and of itself is a crime. It's a form of fraud. It's where an individual can exert an unfair advantage, whether it be through intimidation, threat, position of authority, whatever, over another individual and effectively change their opinion and deny them freedom of consent because they exert their influence, whether it be through terror, whatever. I'm going to beat you up if you don't do X, Y, and Z. That's coercion. That's intimidation. That's threat. You can't have consent. No consent, or consent obtained through fraudulent means, such as undue influence, is a core element of fraud, and therefore it is a crime. It's going to lead to all kinds of things in the normal world. When I say normal, I'm talking about day-to-day citizens. If day-to-day citizens can use undue influence, it can amount to additional charges of fraud, witness tampering, etc. It just goes on and on and on, because undue influence can be used in so many aspects. Tampering with witnesses, altering information, obstructing law enforcement or investigations, any number of things can be drawn from undue influence exercised over another individual. And in Montana, we actually have a law. There's actually a law that this deals with, and the actual law reads: the definition of undue influence under Montana State Code is the use by one in whom a confidence is reposed by another, or who holds a real or apparent authority over the other person, of the confidence or authority for the purpose of obtaining an unfair advantage over the other person. 2, taking an unfair advantage of another person's weakness of mind. Or 3, taking a grossly oppressive and unfair advantage of another person's necessities or distress. Sound familiar? Seriously, does that at all sound familiar to anybody out there? This is what prosecutors do. This is what cops do. This is what judges do. This is what executive branch members do. Even legislators do this to a certain degree when they go to their voters and they try to use scare tactics, or their positions of authority to gain influence over their masses. When they're allowed to lie, manipulate, or simply take advantage of someone's distress and come in and help and take advantage of it and gain an advantage because of it, it's called undue influence, and it is a crime. Prosecutors and law enforcement have authority over private persons. Bottom line, no question about that. They have the power to arrest you, they have the power to interrogate you, they have the power to do whatever they pretty much want to you within certain boundaries. They can't legally shoot you, but let's not even get into the fact of some of these stories in Flathead where cops do exactly that and get away with it. But within legal rights, they have the right to take you in person, to lock you up in jail, to keep you in prison, up to and including the rest of your life. They have the right to take your property from you. They have the right to deprive you of contact with other people. They have massive power and authority over you. So they are in positions of authority. Remember, one of the first definition of the law is a position of real or apparent authority. There's no question. Government officials, law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, mayors, you name it, they have power and authority over the common people. There's no question about that. They gain further in control by imprisoning people. They put people in jail, and in Montana, no grand juries, no probable cause determination, held under excessive bail, under really draconian conditions. I mean, concrete beds, concrete metal structures, very thin mattresses, one thin little blanket. The rooms are kept ice cold, in the wintertime especially. But there's absolutely no warmth. Even in the summertime, the concrete walls make... I've lived inside Flathead County Jail for 2 years. Okay, I can speak first-hand knowledge. This isn't coming second-hand. This isn't being... I lived this. Okay, and I can tell you, it's a draconian circumstance. Many people, probably half the population of the jail, sleep on the floor because they don't have enough beds. And the beds they do have are either concrete bunks or they're metal frames. So imagine if you're living in a cold facility and you're sleeping on something that by its very nature absorbs cold, stone and metal. Do you think that maybe, just maybe, you might be cold? Yeah. And when I was in there, they didn't let you have pillows. You had to roll up your blanket to use as a pillow. So you had a choice between using it as a blanket for a pillow or using a blanket for a blanket. Yeah, they gave you a sweatshirt because they knew it was cold in there, but that didn't keep your feet from getting cold. It didn't keep your legs from getting cold because you didn't have any real protection. It's a thin material. I mean, it's draconian. You suffer constantly. And when I have a chronic joint pain disease that specifically responds to cold, and I don't receive medical treatment, it's deliberate indifference of medical care. So you're held under draconian conditions. Imprisonment is not a let's go, out to the country club kind of thing. In normal circumstances, it's not. I can't speak for many other jails. I haven't been in many other jails. But I can tell you about Flathead County. And I can tell you that Flathead County, it is as barbaric as you can get without, forcing you to live in the stench of your own poop. I mean, at least the toilet's flush. But the toilets are metal. Once again, cold. Oh, yeah. In effect, government asserts and maintains control over the physical body of defendants. They take them physically out of their lives. They deprive them access to their bank accounts, to their loved ones, to their support structure. They gain an unfair advantage by virtue of this inherent authority and through that control that's gained from it. They take unfair advantage of defendants through their weakened states of mind. Isolationism, imprisonment, perpetual fear, these engender weakened minds, weakened mental states. It wears you down, even without the physical aspect, which is torturous. Even to a normal person, to someone with a chronic joint pain disease like myself, or someone who has a underlying medical condition, it's even worse. It is torture. It is cruel and unusual punishment. There's no doubt about that. This weakens your resolve. This wears you down. You start to decline in your mental faculties, your ability to recall, your ability to think straight and rational is diminished. You're given barely enough food to survive on. The food is substandard. You don't receive the proper nutrition in your diet. You don't receive the proper care or housing, and you're oppressed and isolated around a bunch of other people who feel exactly the same diminished capacity of existence. You're animals in a stable. And this diminishes your mental capacity. There's just no doubt about it. You look at every single psychological report on the subject of brainwashing. This is what they do. This is how they brainwash people. They cut them off, they isolate them, they deprive them of basic necessities, and in doing so, the person finds the subject's will to be more malleable. Kind of ring a bell, anyone? You wear them down, you make them more malleable, you get them you start exerting your undue influence over them. The same imprisonment builds necessity and desperation for freedom. You're just desperate for it. It's this necessity. This whole thing creates massive, massive fear, distress, emotional duress. And remember, that's the criteria of what is necessary for undue influence. And someone who's real or apparent authority exercises an unfair advantage of another person's weakness of mind, or takes grossly oppressive and unfair advantage of another person's necessities or distress. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think this is? Remember, the Eighth Amendment forbids excessive bail. The framers of the Constitution did not design a penal system in which you were accused, went to jail for up to a year or longer, while you waited to see if you could be tried, while you were held under excessive bail. I mean, that was the whole point of no excessive bail. The idea and the principle behind that element the framers saw in England is this is exactly what the English did to their prisoners. They would throw them in jail and hold them indefinitely until they would break and confess to crimes, even if they didn't commit them. This is why that element exists in our Constitution. It's why there's a prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. So why is Montana allowed to do this with impunity? They're allowed to take people out of their lives, hold them in isolation. Once again, and I say this over and over again, go to the Flathead County Sheriff's Department and look at the jail page. It says right on there, the majority of people detained in this facility are in pre-trial detention, which means they have not been tried, they have not been convicted, they are for all purposes of the law, still innocent until proven guilty, yet their civil rights and their civil liberties are deprived. They're held and detained under the most atrocious conditions that could be legally allowed, and quite frankly, it's not legal. This doesn't meet any health department standard. This doesn't meet any habitable or human condition. Bare minimum. These are numbers. These are not people. These are numbers. These are animals. These are people who lose their identities in the system. And it makes it okay. It makes it okay to sit there and make them into something they're not. Make them into criminals before they're even convicted. This wears people down, this fear, this constant oppression. And that's exactly what it is. It is oppression. To sit here and be subjected to all this. And then to use all of that. Here we're going to present you with a plea bargain. You know all this torture you've been going through, all this horrific, isolationism and everything else you've been going through? It's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse, and you're going to be here for a lot longer if you don't take a plea deal. Because instead of 2 years that we're offering you, as an example, you could get 20 if you go to trial. If you go to trial and you lose, you could get a lot harsher sentence. So look at all this abuse we're heaping on you right now and consider how much longer it can go on. Now, in all fairness, undue influence can exist in all areas of interpersonal and professional relationships. It exists between parent and child sometimes, and it can be either side of the equation. If the parent is older or debilitated with a disability of some kind, the child could have an undue influence over the parent. So just one or the other side of this equation don't equate to being some kind of a dominant. Parents over child, child over parent. Either could have undue influence over the other. Husband, wife, same thing. Either the husband or the wife could have undue influence over the other person. Trustees and beneficiaries, attorneys, clients, pastors, parishioners, doctors, patients, bosses, employees, guardians, wards, etc., 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 etc. You get the idea. Anytime there's a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, business associates, whatever, there is no limit to the number of relationships that an undue influence can take effect. But nowhere is it more inappropriate than when it is used by government against the citizens of which they govern. Not in a democracy. In a democracy, the government should fear the people, not the other way around. The people fear the government. That's what makes the United States a tyranny, not a democracy, not a republic. That's a delusion. That's propaganda. I've said this before. When you're driving down the road and a police officer pulls up behind you, what is your automatic response? It is not, oh, hey, look, we got a cop behind us. Wave, kids, wave. No, it's kids, stay down, stay seated, don't do anything. There's a police officer behind us. Because your immediate response is fear. You check your signals, you check your area around you, you see and check in your own mind whether you're doing anything wrong that might be attracting their attention. Because you are afraid. Regardless of whether you consciously want to admit it or not, you are fearful of consequence unless you are in a position where you know you have nothing to worry about, which means you're part of the elite structure, you're part of the government itself, possibly. You basically have some kind of shelter or protection, and that scores to the elitism I've talked about before. Most people fear government. And rightfully so. There's a horrific amount of oppression and power the government has. Undue influence that I'm talking about tonight is just the blanket issue about how they get away with it. They accomplish everything they accomplish by having an undue influence over the people that they oppress. And although it's actually on the books as an act that is illegal and unallowable and inadmissible and not supposed to exist or be done, it's prohibited by law. It's identified. It's enumerated in the Montana State Code. Government officials can do it. Government can do all this to you, even though it's forbidden by law. And prosecutors take full advantage of this, full advantage of this undue influence to pressure defendants into plea deals. Law enforcement and prosecutors use undue influence to inspire fear and desperation every single day. It's not an unusual or an exception to the rule. It is common practice. It is modus operandi. It is how they do their job. It is how they are trained to do their jobs. It isn't, well, we've tried everything else, let's try this. This is the first thing out of the wheelhouse. This is what they do because they know it works. And they are given this blanket allowance to do it. Because the U.S. Supreme Court has even come back and said, it's okay and it's perfectly allowable because the defendant has the right to not agree to the plea bargain. Let's see. You've lost all your life, your liberty, your freedom, everything else, but you have the right to not participate. You have the right to decline to participate. Undue influence, ladies and gentlemen, sure. If you're a parent and you have, I know a story, I'm not going to identify the person, but I know a story of somebody who says that when she was a little girl, she remembers very, very plainly when a cop pulled her mom over and she told her daughter, go down on the floor and act like your stomach hurts. Because the idea was the mom was trying to get out of the ticket. I'm rushing my child to the hospital. She's got terrible cramps. That's why I'm speeding. Undue influence, ladies and gentlemen. The mom has a position of authority over the child, instructs the child to do this. The child doesn't. Now, sure, the child could have declined to do so. I don't want to do that, Mom. That would be lying. The child didn't in this scenario, but nevertheless, the child could have voluntarily. You could be tortured. Bamboo under your nails, needles and blades in your arm, maybe even having flesh torn back from your arm to elicit response. You can still refuse to do whatever your torturer is telling you to do. Just because you have the potential to say no does not make it all right. That's why undue influence is a criminal act, is why it's an element of fraud. Because undue influence says you can't exert an unfair advantage, take advantage of somebody's fear or their circumstances. You can't implement this necessity over everything else and say it's acceptable, because you could say no. It's a terrible decision. It's a terrible precedent. Welcome to the United States, we have a lot of them. And the United States Supreme Court is supposed to be the supreme body of law and order, and it's very political. There's no other question. It's political. It's aimed at conservative and liberal idealisms. It's not about law. It's about the pursuit of individual ideas of how government should work and whether government should be allowed the excesses it's allowed. And this is one instance where, in my humble opinion, and the humble opinion of many, 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 many people out there in the country, it shouldn't have been. But it is our system of government, it is how we are set up, and it is wrong, but it is a problem. It's part of the problem. And it's something that Montana has fully taken advantage of because it's twisted the circumstances and taken the undue influence and accelerated it to a monstrous degree. The idea here is that prosecutors and law enforcement, when they inspire fear and desperation, it's unchecked, it's unregulated, and it's permitted by all elements of law. It's permitted by state law, it's permitted by federal law, it's permitted by the United States Supreme Court. However, even the United States Supreme Court assumes that there's basic tenets of due process and civil liberties. They assume there's a due process exists. They assume that grand juries exist. They don't exist in Montana. No grand jury, no probable cause challenge, excessive bails, and cruel, unusual punishment. They're routine in Montana. Coercion exists far more than just, okay, a person's accused, they go on with their life, they sit down across the table with a prosecutor makes them a deal. That's not what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. If that's all it was, okay, I'm accusing you of a crime, you're out until you see trial. In the process of negotiating, your attorney goes, the prosecutor tries to get you to a deal. In that deal, you sit across a table and you decide, without any other outside or undue influence, you make a decision of whether it's practical for you to take a plea deal. That's not what's going on in Montana. Not even close. These people who are put under this threat and duress either have been in jail or are in jail and have suffered and already know the consequences if they don't go along with the plea deal. It's a terrorism tactic. Statistically, permitting plea bargains and underlying undue influence has broken the justice system. It's broken down the constitutional right to trial by jury. This is a constitutional right to all Americans. When you're accused of a crime, you have the right to have your cause brought before a jury of your peers and to have the state prove its allegations against you. But it's waived far too often because of this undue influence, out of the fear of consequence should they not go along with a plea deal or do not bend to the undue influence that's being exerted over them. In the 19th century, guilty pleas were around 20% statistically. By the 21st century, it's around 90%. And most of those are through plea bargains. I don't want to say 90%, but most of those, by far, a significant percentage of those guilty pleas are through plea bargains. Today, juries decide less than 4% of criminal cases. 4%. Less than 4% of criminal cases. So for out of every 1,000 people, 40 are decided by jury. Do you not see a problem in that, ladies and gentlemen? I do. I see a problem with it. I see a huge problem with it. When only 4% of all criminal prosecutions are settled by a jury, there's a problem there. That means 96% of prosecutions don't rely on it. They settle by plea bargains in most cases. Pretty much all the rest are settled by plea bargains. Jury does not have a political motivation. They don't have the judges, prosecutors, and the like. They're motivated by re-election. They're motivated by their own pocketbook. They're motivated by their own careers and their ambitions. A jury's not. A jury is designed as a constitutional check against all three branches of government. Whereas all the branches are supposed to have their own checks and balances, a jury acts as a check against the overreaching ambitions of corrupt officials. But if the jury is not even allowed to hear a case, how can they check anything? Government is unrestrained if it has no check. If there's no one checking it, no one saying, okay, that's overreaching, that's oppressive, they have no check. Jury members have no long-term commitment beyond a less than annual duty. I mean, in most cases, you might get a jury summons once every couple of years. In some jurisdictions, once every 5 years. You don't do this every week. You don't do this every month. You don't have a regular salary that you draw from. This is, I'm going to do my civic duty, sometimes reluctantly, but you do it maybe once every couple of years, once every 5 years, wherever your jurisdiction is. So you're not doing this. You have no dependency beyond the individual trial that you have to sit as a jury member over. So where's the concern there? Why doesn't the government want the jury to look at this? Because juries are fickle and they can't guarantee convictions, for one. But even more so, they're costly. They're costly and they're time consuming. If juries have the power, if juries have the power to stop overreaching the power by all three branches of government, is any surprise, the government doesn't want juries. They avoid juries whenever possible. Should that come as a surprise to anybody? When you have power that doesn't want to be checked, you avoid those checks. You find loopholes. You find ways around them. In government, prosecution, criminal prosecution, and the overcriminalized justice system have found plea bargains and undue influence to exert and control over those plea bargains. Essentially, undue influence covers all tactics used to control and intimidate defendants. An abuse of power to give government officials the ability to bypass a critical constitutional check against the very same abuse of power that's at issue. When a defendant is coerced into a plea, there is no check upon the prosecution, judge, or law enforcement. The defendant gives up the right to a jury by trial. There is no reason for the prosecution to prove anything because they've just coerced a confession out of their defendant. There's no burden anymore. But like I said, keep in mind, juries are expensive and they are time consuming. In a prison for profit system, they break down the quick cash philosophy. If you can't pump people through the system without any kind of blockage or delay, you break down that bottom line. I mean, if the whole idea is to get thousands and thousands and billions of dollars to hold inmates and to keep them in the system, if you're burning up that money to hold them to trials and juries and everything else, you're not getting the money anymore because you're spending it. It becomes too costly. It would bankrupt, even with all the federal funding, it would bankrupt systems. And that's just the financial cost. In Flathead County alone, there are over 1,000 prosecutions per year. Now, it's impossible to get accurate, exact numbers because, quite frankly, Flathead County goes out of their way to avoid posting this information. Montana State goes out of their way to avoid posting this information online or making it searchable. The only way to actually do it would actually go in, look at every single case file, look at every prosecution filed on an annual basis, find out which ones were convicted, which ones were not. Personally, I have never met, and I've been at this for 18 years now, I have never met a single person accused in Flathead County who was exonerated and walked out the door without a conviction. Never. I've not met a single person in Flathead County who has been accused of a crime and not been convicted of something. Now, keep in mind, plea bargains often means they plea down from the original charge. So they don't necessarily get convicted of the original charge, but they can get convicted of something. They don't walk out the door scot-free. They walk out with a conviction on their record. Whether it be a felony or a misdemeanor, whatever, they walk out the door with a conviction. And keep in mind, this 1,000 figure, and I use that figure because at any given time, the Flathead County Detention Center has around 100 inmates. Sometimes there's a little more, sometimes a little less, but average of 100 inmates. Right now, as of today at this posting, there's 96. I checked. If you allow for the revolving door between people who are let out on bail, people who are misdemeanors and are only in there for short periods of time, and right now we actually have supposed to have shorter jail times and shorter periods of time inside the jail because of COVID. So actually, the misdemeanor charges are going out a lot faster. They're getting released pending hearings because they don't want as many people in the jail. But there's still maintained over 100 people in the jail on a regular basis. And if you take 12 months and just say that people are revolving through the door at a sufficiently fast rate, you're looking at over 1,000 people a year. That's just my own observations. Like I said, it's impossible to sit here short of going through the roster every single day and making a note every single day of how many people are released, how many people are convicted, and going down and checking those records and everything else. It would create quite a watchdog, and quite frankly, it would raise attention. Flathead County does not like attention. Remember, I got put in prison because I raised questions about police officers who were making sexual and physical assaults upon teenagers in the alley behind my business. Can you imagine how much more aggressive Flathead County would get if they had somebody going down there and looking at their records every single day? Yeah, you're going to have some kind of major insulation to do that. I don't. I put my neck out every time I put one of these podcasts out. I couldn't go down every day and expect not to be retaliated against. They would definitely not be happy with that. Hey, if somebody has some insulation, some etiquette, maybe a legal firm that wants to come and actually down here and do this, I'll help cooperate. I'll help coordinate, give you ideas where to go, what to look for statistics and what is not available online or searchable. But let's face it, as an individual, I don't have a corporation or a government entity or a large financial backing behind me that was going to keep me out of jail if they decided to retaliate again. I don't. There's certain fights I have to pick. I pick my fights. I pick the battles. Putting information out right now is more important than trying to go down and get in their faces. Because getting in their faces in the past has simply blown up in my face more than once. But anyway, if we go back to the original figures and we say, let's just say there's 1,000 prosecutions. There's more. I know there's more. Let's just say there's 1,000 prosecutions, criminal prosecutions in Flathead County a year. And let's break that down evenly between felony prosecutions and misdemeanor prosecutions. And your average felony prosecution takes between 3 to 5 days. Some take 2 weeks. Some take longer. Murder trials, etc., take longer. But your average felony trial takes 3 to 5 days. If we split the felony convictions down the middle, or we take the convictions down the middle, say 500 are felonies, and we say that, let's say average of 4 days, because 3 to 5, so 4 days. Let's say an average trial takes 4 days. You would need 375 days to process with 4 judges presiding over this. So 4 judges, every single on the bench every single day, have 375 days to prosecute all those cases. Just if there was even 500. We only have 261 working days a year, ladies and gentlemen. 261. And this would exclude every single other case from ever being heard. You wouldn't have civil cases. You wouldn't have divorces. You wouldn't have child custody. You wouldn't have anything except criminal prosecutions. It would break the system. You wouldn't have enough days in a year to prosecute all these cases. It would bankrupt the system. It would bankrupt the system both in time, it would bankrupt the system in resources. They simply wouldn't have the ability to do it. And they would become backed up. They wouldn't be able to. If everyone just sat back and said, I refuse to take a plea deal. I refuse to take a plea deal. I will take my chances in court. It would break the system. 100%. But it's real easy to say that from the outside and look at it from a practical civil position. When you're inside and you're being tortured and you're being isolated and you're living in fear every single moment of every single day about what your future holds for you. It's a lot harder to sit back on principle and say, I'm not going to cooperate because, I want to help break the system. I want to help shut down this criminal justice system. Yeah, there's no one who's going to, if you lose, you're going to face more consequences. But if everybody got together and did do this, it would stop it. It would grind the court system to a halt. No question about it, ladies and gentlemen. It would shut down the criminal justice system here as we know it. If plea bargains were thrown out the window tomorrow, if they were outlawed, you would see a massive reform in how criminal prosecutions are done and how many people are prosecuted. Because then you would start actually picking and choosing people who are actually guilty of the crimes they're accused of, not just, hey, here's something we can accuse this person of, let's put them in jail until we can break their will and make them agree to take a plea bargain. Just about everybody who is prosecuted is convicted under the current process. As I said, I've honestly, in my 18 plus years of trying to fight this system, I have yet to meet a single person in Flathead County who's been accused and not convicted of something. Between the prosecutors and the government officials stacking the deck and the undue influence that's maintained over prisoners, it's impossible to prevail. And it's no wonder that people so readily take the plea bargain, even if they're innocent, because they're afraid of the consequences. They may not have done the crime, but there's a serious, stiff penalty hanging over their head if they lose. And if the deck's already stacked against them and they're already suffering and their will's already getting broken, and there's no end in sight, because they're going to be held in jail until they break. Remember, I was held in jail for 18 months before I saw trial. 18 months in pre-trial detention. I didn't break, but that's me. I'm the exception to the rule. More people break, innocent people I've talked to who I genuinely and honestly believe in their sincerity that they did not commit the crimes they were accused of. But they're desperate and they're fearful and they're suffering and they want it to end. It's just human nature. Undue influence is the primary means by which prosecution keep prison for profit viable. It's the method by which they use to make sure that people are run through a factory line setup. Arrest, hold them until they stew enough, they'll take a plea deal, flush them down the drain to the prison system. That's literally the criminal justice system. They have no burden of proof in over 90% of the cases they have to present. Remember, only 4% of criminal prosecutions are actually brought to trial or brought before a jury. Less than 4% per year. That's national. That's not Montana. That's national. But even if you look at the national standard, that's horrific. If over 90% of these people are put through a factory line, accuse, arrest, hold, once they've stewed enough, they take a plea bargain, flush them down the system. That's literally how it works. Literally. The bottom line here is that government is committing a criminal acts to do all of this. Undue influence is a criminal, fraudulent misconduct act. It is a crime. It is a form of fraud where undue influence is used for unfair advantage and coercion. Regardless, it is a legally unlawful and impermissible act. Yet government is permitted to exercise it with impunity, to continue to do so, to heap more and more and more abuse upon defendants until the defendants break and give in to this coercion, this undue influence. If a citizen did what the government does, if it held someone involuntarily to coerce a confession, it'd be criminal. If I picked up somebody I knew was guilty of a crime, knew it, bold in my heart, knew it, they were guilty of a crime, and I held them in my house and I tied them to a chair and I said, "You tell the truth or I'm going to take this needle and I'm going to stick it in your eye." "Oh, I'll confess. Just put me in, don't stab my eye out." Person goes to jail. I'm going to jail. Are you kidding me? I'm going to jail. I just committed a horrific crime. Okay, I'm going to put the person in a basement. Just put them in a basement. Cold, wet, damp. Throw some stale bread and a couple pieces of meat down to them 3 times a day. And eventually they want out of that basement. I'll say whatever you want me to say, man. Just let me out of the basement. I'm still going to jail. They're not. I committed a crime. So how can government get away with it? Why is the government allowed to commit crimes to prove crimes? If you have a crime, how does it at all matter to justice to commit a crime to convict the criminal? Where is the burden of proof when there's no need to actually prove anything? If undue influence can coerce confessions and is legally allowed to do so, and in Montana under a more horrifically designed system than anywhere else in the country, where's justice? And I leave you with that question tonight. Where is justice? As always, as I say at the top of the video, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Share the video with your friends. Tell your friends and family what you think of this video. Put a review on, comment on it. Let me know. Give me feedback. Also, as I said before, all of my podcasts are available on monspiracy.podbean.com, which networks out to several different podcast sites. So if you have a preferred site that you're interested in, you'll probably find my podcasts on it. If you don't find my podcast on your favorite media stream, let me know. I'll do my best to make sure that the podcast gets there. Now, also, if it's just a reminder, if there is no video, there's no text attached to this video, if you're watching this video in a context somehow that the text isn't on it, please go to monspiracy.podbean.com to get the text, or to YouTube, because YouTube will have it as well. If you'd like to support us, information is in that very text on how to do so. As always, I do hope that everyone out there is being safe, and whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.